people think it's fabulous. Regulatory network theory, and regulatory networks which will solve everything. But there are two problems with regulatory networks that will solve nothing. They will definitely be a collection of the great and the good and represent nobody else but the great and the good, and they will be captured by the regulated industry, whether that's financial services and Goldman Sachs or a pollutant industry.
So if you agree, I will turn now to the panelists for a last turn of answers, because by 5:30 we should have been gone. Professor.
I think you have to step one step away from the level of discussion we're having and confront some realities. One of the realities is that we are addicted to growth. We want our stock portfolio to grow. We want our bank account to grow. We want our steel industry to grow. We want our country to grow. If it doesn't grow, it's bad. We rank countries by rate of growth. We rank firms in an industry by rate of growth. And we're all complaining about the low rate of growth and thinking that we can go back to where we were, even though it was funded by borrowing from the future when we should have been saving. So how do you stop the obsession with growth? The second sacred cow is that to rethink the issue of free trade. That actually, free trade has not helped, by the way, the developing world. We all know that. And it may not even help many in the developed world. There's an economist who's a South African named Kaplinsky, who's written a very sobering picture of what the world's going to look like. One producing nation, China, with the other Asian nations being suppliers, and one retailer in the country, Tesco or Walmart or whatever, and basically no innovation and basically control of the economy. These are the special interests you're talking about that have captured the system. But let me raise one more issue, and that is I've taught at MIT for 38 years, and I was trying desperately to understand why the only people whose minds I ever changed were my students, not my colleagues. And that really bothered me for a long time. So you sit with a professor who's your colleague and you say, well, you know, ETS is not a good idea, carbon tax is better, whatever you want to talk about. And he says to you, well, your argument is really compelling. You've really changed my mind. You've opened my eyes. And 2 weeks later, he writes an article or gives a speech exactly expressing what he had before. Now, this really bothered me, so I'm trying to understand, what is it? And I drew upon my training as a lawyer here. And it goes to the issue of what kind of public debate you have. We all know from psychology the problem of anchoring. If you believe in global warming, you continue to read the things that reinforce that view. If you don't believe in global warming, you gravitate towards the books, the skeptical environmentalists and everything else. And I always thought, and you probably are assuming, that if you present a balanced argument, this is for global warming, not against global warming, that if you present a cogent argument with the defenses for and against, you can shift people's minds. What the recent neuroscience shows is that if you read a balanced article, the only thing that imprints is the thing that reinforces your prior. In other words, you read a balanced article, you were against global warming, you're still even more intensely against global warming. So what is the lesson? Why is it that I've been able to change my students' mind? Because I say, Mr. Stavropoulos, tell me why this decision is right. Tell me why it is not right. Stand up when you're telling me this. I am going to have confrontation, and I'm going to make the adrenaline flow through your body. The political scene, we have the Prime Minister's questions. If you look at the Prime Minister's question, which is not repeated in any other parliament in the world as far as I can see, you really put people under heat. You really show the soft underbelly. I think we have to stop having polite arguments I don't mean that we need to use bad language, but we're not to leave anybody off the hook. We ought to really face and confront. We need to do it in the media. We need to do it on a personal level. We need to do it at conferences. No, what you're saying is total rubbish. Get the adrenaline flowing. It is the only way you change people's minds. Otherwise, I've had this insight that we're just simply preaching to the converted or writing things which make no difference. Add to that the fact that the press, controlled by private industry, gives equal space to unequally meritorious ideas. You got to give equal space to evolution that you do to genetics or whatever the theories are. You're not going to shift the debate. And as a lawyer, and someone who's trained as a lawyer in my last educational, it's confrontation that produces changes, not debate, not polite society, not white papers, for what it's worth.
Dr. Hitchcock.
Okay. I would actually like to try and deal with your points there, if I may. I actually have learnt over the years never ever to say no to any solution that might deal with our environmental problems, because there's always a positive somewhere. And I think that in relation to government, we don't have joined-up thinking, and I don't think that we have a truly global plan. I just don't think that we are at that stage yet. I have no idea why, because humanity is, the human race is so creative in all other ways, but we just simply don't seem to be able to get to some kind of consensus. My point is, I'm at the sharp end of this. I take your point absolutely, because every single day that I practice, my professional indemnity insurance is on the line, because I have to tell companies whether they do this, whether they do that, whether they're in compliance and whether they're not. And if I am radically wrong or out of sync, then I will get sued or I will get sacked. And I actually don't want to do that, either of them. And so I really have my adrenaline running every single time I have to make a big decision with a large industrial client, or if I have to give advice in relation to how to comply with something. And I think that's an absolutely fundamental point. You have to get people to really search about what they believe and whether they want a permanent change in behaviour. And I think that's what government needs to do. I think they have to get the same passion about this, and I don't know where they're going to get it from. And if I did, I would probably know the numbers to the UK lottery as well, and I wouldn't be here because I'd be a multimillionaire. But I think that's the answer. We have to get some passion and some joined-up thinking at governmental level, because at the moment, the drivers are very much based on popularity. We have a coalition government, for instance, in the UK, and they simply don't have any defined strategy at the moment. It's under review in relation to carbon and low-carbon approaches. So for me, it's about getting people at the top to really determine those important questions in a way that's joined-up thinking. I don't know any other way of dealing with the problem, because it's a global issue. Sorry.
Professor Varoufakis.
Let me start by bowing to your superior knowledge of the malaria problem, its texture and deep history. I don't pretend to know enough in order to have a different view from the one that you articulated. Having said that, the point I was making concerned the system of incentives upon which the whole current system and scheme of providing solutions for third world diseases is founded upon. So if you want, you can erase my reference to malaria and replace it with HIV, in which case I think that you would agree that my point stands. But even in the case of malaria, from what I understand, and again, I don't understand, I'm almost ignorant on the subject. It seems to me, from what I've been hearing and reading, that there are simple solutions to the problem of malaria. They're not being provided because we live in a world in which profit-driven behavior is what guides action, and there is simply not enough profit there. So everything else I said, I think, still stands. Now, you talked about the crisis. That was your question after your comment, after scolding me, rightly. And you mentioned James Mead. And you mentioned the idea of raising taxes in order to spend on infrastructure. I'm not sure that this is what he would have said. Perhaps he would, but if he did, I would disagree with him. In the depths of a crisis, of a recession, raising taxes is adding insult to injury. What we have at the moment is a situation in which, let me put it very briefly because we don't have time. For 20, 25 years or so, a form of private money divided and multiplied in the financial sector. You had the public money, and then you had the private money. The private money was contracts, pieces of paper, derivatives, whatever. They grew and grew and grew and acted as Hayekian private money, inflating the economy on the basis of a bubble, which, however, was having real effects in terms of increasing output and so on and so forth. At some point, Nemesis addressed hubris, and that private money blew up. It burned down. That was 2008. And what happened was states replaced that private money in Wall Street, so in Wall Street and banks, and Royal Bank of Scotland and so on, so that the whole system would not collapse. And in doing so, the problem was transferred from the private sector to the public sector. And now they're cutting. So what happens is the transformations of Ovid. The crisis is transforming and transforming and retransforming itself, shifting from one realm to the other, and not being addressed. Your suggestion is spot on, 50%. The idea that during this period, what you need is infrastructural work that increases future productivity and addresses some of the very serious problems with greening humanity that we were talking about. But that requires politicians who can stand up to those who failed, but who think that they have a God-given right to be sustained by the rest of us at the expense of real development, which is different from growth, both in terms of true living standards, not gizmos and cars, and greening humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, talking of malaria reminded me that this country owes a lot to this illness, because you remember perhaps that in the most crucial moment of the Battle of Missolonghi, Lord Byron had the crazy idea of going down there and work for the revolution. Up to then, England was not paying any attention to the drama of these people. And then the mosquitoes and malaria saved the country, because he died out of malaria there. And this changed English politics. So I keep saying that this is malaria is an illness to which
a very romantic view of history, but it's a very nice one.
Very tediously we owe a lot. But anyway, please allow me, in the name of everyone, to thank the...
May I have my 1 minute?
Oh, yeah. Chris?
I do not remember to have distributed 1 minute to everyone, but if you may, yes, if you want, of course. I'm sorry for that.
No, sorry. There was just a very specific question about the difference between market-based, state-based, and network-based. And basically, my analysis, so to speak, was to show that they are all imperfect. But in many respects, the pluralism and network-based is actually nearer to some sort of sustainability than alternatives. But even this needs to be added by sort of ethical and cultural considerations, and even eating habits considerations, because I think that in many respects we can, and lifestyle habits, you may have more contribution by eating less meat and biking to work than from everything else we have discussed here, being a bit cynical. But apart from that, I do think that network civilization and culture and ethics is likely to be more important than either of the three perspectives. And I did want to comment on the government and infrastructure. Yes,